My mother's funeral was on a Friday. At the reception afterward, a man I had never seen walked up to me and said, "I think we have the same mother." He was standing next to the buffet table in my aunt's house in Chicago, holding a plate he had not touched, wearing a tie that was slightly too short. He was my height. He had my mother's nose. I had never seen him before in my life. My name is Marcus. I am 47 years old. My mother, Dolores, died on a Tuesday in November after a short illness that went fast at the end, the way these things sometimes do. She was 71. She had been a school librarian for 34 years. She made the best sweet potato pie in our family and had opinions about everything and was right about most of it. I am an only child. I had been an only child for 47 years. The man's name was Gerald. He was 44. He had driven from Indianapolis that morning. He had found out about the funeral through an obituary. My cousin had posted it online, the way people do now, and Gerald had seen it because he had been searching my mother's name periodically for years, waiting for something like this to appear. He said, "I have been trying to find a way to reach out for a long time. I did not want to do it while she was alive. I did not want to cause problems. But I could not let her be buried without—" He stopped. He said, "I just needed to be here." I looked at him for a long time. My mother's nose, my height, my grandmother's hands, I realized, looking at the way he held the plate. I said, "Come with me." We went to my aunt's back porch. It was November in Chicago, which means it was cold and the sky was the specific gray that settles in for the winter and does not leave until April. We stood on that porch and he told me what he knew, which was not everything, but was enough. Before I tell you the rest, subscribe, because every story on this channel is real, it is raw, and it will stay with you. And drop a comment right now. Where in the world are you watching from? I read every single one. Now let me tell you what Gerald told me on that back porch, and what we found out together in the months that followed. Gerald had been adopted at birth. He had always known this. His adoptive parents, a couple in Indianapolis named Robert and Nancy Webb, had told him when he was 7 with the specific honesty that good parents bring to hard truths. He had grown up loved, settled, with no particular urgency about finding his biological family. That urgency came later, in his 30s, after his adoptive father died and something in him shifted. He had used one of the DNA testing services. He had found distant cousins, third cousins, fourth cousins, but nothing closer, until 2 years ago when the system flagged a first-degree relative match. Not a parent. Parents were both gone by then on the biological side, according to what he eventually pieced together. A sibling match. Me. He had found my profile. He had seen enough to know that my mother's name matched the name on his adoption paperwork, a name the agency had not been required to give him, but had included in a sealed document he had petitioned to open in 2019. Dolores. He had found her. He had found her address, her phone number, her workplace. He had driven to Chicago twice and sat in his car outside the library where she worked, trying to decide whether to go in. Both times he had driven away. He said, "She looked happy." When she came out at the end of the day, she looked like a person who had a life that was working. I could not figure out how to walk into that and not break something. I said, "So you waited?" He said, "I waited, and then she died." He said it simply, without self-pity, but I heard the weight of it. 2 years of knowing and not knowing how to act on knowing, and then an obituary on a Tuesday morning in November. I said, "How old were you when she gave you up?" He said, 3 days. I said, She was how old? He said, 24, according to the paperwork. She was not married. She was not in a position to... He stopped. He said, I have not spent a lot of time being angry about it. I had a good life. The Webbs were good people. I understand that a 24-year-old woman in 1980 had limited options and made the best choice she could. I have made my peace with the choice. I said, I haven't. He looked at me. I said, she never told me. I had a brother and she never told me. For 47 years. He said, I know. I'm sorry. I said, don't apologize. You didn't do anything wrong. We stood on that porch in the November cold for another 20 minutes. My aunt came to the back door twice to check on me, and I waved her off. My wife Renee found me eventually. She is good at finding me when I have gone somewhere to be alone with something. And I introduced her to Gerald and watched her face go through the same series of adjustments mine had gone through. The specific recalibration of a person absorbing new information about a family they married into. She shook his hand. She said, I'm Renee. She said, do you want to come back inside? It's cold. He came back inside. He stayed for another hour. He met my aunts, who absorbed the information with varying degrees of shock and silence. My Aunt Patricia, who is the family historian and the keeper of all things that were ever kept quiet, looked at Gerald for a long time and then looked at me and said very softly, I wondered. I said, you knew? She said, I suspected. A long time ago. She would not say more than that. I have thought about that sentence many times since. Gerald drove back to Indianapolis that evening. We exchanged numbers. I told him I would call. He said, whenever you're ready, take whatever time you need. I did not call for 3 weeks. I spent 3 weeks sitting with something that had no name yet. The grief for my mother, which was already there and already large, and now this other thing, which did not have grief's shape but was related to it. The discovery of an absence. The specific loss of something you did not know you had until it told you what you had missed. I am an only child, I had told myself for 47 years. The identity of it, the particular quality of growing up in a household where you were the only one, the specific loneliness and privilege of that, the way it shapes how you move through rooms and families and the world. All of that was still true. I had still grown up that way, and it had still made me who I am. But underneath it, unbeknownst to me, there had been someone else. I called Gerald on a Sunday. He answered immediately. We talked for 2 hours. He told me about Indianapolis. He is a high school history teacher, which I found I could not stop thinking about. My mother spent 34 years in a school library, and her son she had never known became a teacher. He has a wife named Angela and 2 daughters, 12 and 9. He coaches youth basketball on Saturday mornings. He has his adoptive mother Nancy's laugh, he says, which is a specific kind of laugh, and which he considers one of the things she gave him. He told me about his life with the specificity of someone who has been waiting a long time to tell it to someone who has a particular claim to hearing it. Not a performance, just the telling of a life to someone who shares its origins. I told him about ours, about our mother, the sweet potato pie, the 34 years in the library, the opinions, the way she said your name when she was proud of you versus the way she said it when you had done something wrong, and how you could tell the difference before the sentence was finished. He listened to all of it. At the end, he said, "Thank you for telling me that. She is real to me now in a way she wasn't before." I said, She was real. She was very real. She was also, apparently, someone who kept things that should not have been kept. He said, "Yes." I said, "I'm still working out how to feel about that." He said, "I understand. Take whatever time you need." My wife Renee has been the person I have been able to say the unsayable things to. She has known me for 22 years, and she understands the specific texture of my silences, and she does not try to fill them with reassurance before I am ready for reassurance. She asked me once, about a month after the funeral, "What do you miss most?" I said, "I miss being able to ask her." She said, "What would you ask?" I said, "Why she didn't tell me." Not why she gave him up. I think I understand that. 1980, 24 years old, alone. I would ask why she never told me. When I was old enough to understand. When it would have been a gift rather than a secret. Renee said, "Maybe she was afraid of what you would think of her." I said, "She should have trusted me more than that." She said, "Yes, she should have." This is the part I am still carrying. The love I had for my mother is not diminished. It is what it was, full and real, and now grief-colored, the way love becomes after loss. But alongside it is something harder, the knowledge that she made a choice, for 47 years, to keep her son and her other son in separate compartments of her life. And that choice had a cost that she never had to pay herself. Gerald paid part of it. I am paying part of it now. My daughter Imani is 22. She met Gerald in February when he came to Chicago for a long weekend. I had not told her what to expect. I had told her the basic facts and let her form her own response. She is perceptive in the way that young people who grew up paying attention are perceptive, and she looked at Gerald for a while when they first met and then said, "You have Grandma's nose." He said, "So I've been told." She said, "She made amazing sweet potato pie." He said, "I heard." She said, "I'll make you some." She did. He ate 2 pieces. I watched them at my kitchen table, and I thought about what my mother had kept from herself. Not just from me, not just from Gerald, from herself. The possibility of this. 2 sons who did not know each other, a granddaughter who had not known she had an uncle, a family that had been smaller than it was because one person had decided, for reasons I will never fully know, to keep the compartments separate. She is gone now. The compartments are open. Gerald Webb teaches history in Indianapolis and coaches basketball on Saturday mornings and has my mother's nose and my grandmother's hands, and 2 daughters who are 12 and 9, and who I met in April when Renee and I drove to Indianapolis for a long weekend. His older daughter, whose name is Destiny, asked me at dinner, "Are you really my dad's brother?" I said, "I think so." She said, "How do you not know for sure?" I said, "Because we just found out, and it's complicated." She thought about this. She said, "But you're going to keep being his brother, right? Even though it's complicated?" I said, "Yes." She said, "Okay, good." She went back to her food. I have thought about that exchange more than almost anything else from the past year. The specific directness of a 12-year-old cutting through the complexity to the thing that matters. Are you going to keep being his brother? Yes, I am going to keep being his brother. I do not know what my mother was afraid of. I do not know what she told herself all those years about why the time was never right. I do not know if she thought about Gerald on his birthdays, or if she drove past the library sometimes and thought about a 3-day-old child she had handed to someone else in 1980. I do not know these things, and I cannot ask. What I know is that Gerald Webb is 44 years old and teaches history and has my mother's nose and makes my daughter laugh. What I know is that Destiny Webb asked me if I was going to keep being her father's brother, and I said yes, and I meant it. What I know is that my mother kept something that should have been shared, and that the sharing is happening now, in the way things happen when they can no longer be kept. It is late. It is enough. My Aunt Patricia called last month. She said, "I want to tell you something I should have told you years ago." I said, "Okay." She told me what she knew, which was more than I expected and less than I hoped. She had suspected because of something she had overheard once in 1981, a conversation between my mother and my grandmother that she had never fully understood and had filed away and had thought about, she said, many times over the years. She said, "I should have asked her directly." I said, "Yes." She said, "I was afraid of the answer." I said, "Aunt Patricia." She said, I know. I said, "It's done now. What matters is what comes next." She said, "Gerald seems like a good man." I said, He is a very good man." She said, "Dolores would have loved him." I sat with that for a long time after we hung up. She would have. I believe that completely. She would have loved him the way she loved teaching and libraries and sweet potato pie and her family, completely and with her whole self. She would have been proud of the history teacher and the basketball coach and the father of 2 girls who asked direct questions. She never got to. That is the loss inside the loss, the grief underneath the grief. I am going to visit Gerald next month. We are going to take our daughters to a Cubs game, his 2 and my 1, 3 cousins who met because a man drove from Indianapolis to stand at a buffet table at a funeral and say 4 words. I think we have the same mother. That is where we are. That is what we are building, in the specific way you build things when the foundation was laid without your knowledge, and you are only now finding out what was always there. I want to tell you what it was like to go through my mother's things after the funeral, knowing what I knew. Renee and I spent a Saturday in December at her house in Hyde Park. My aunts had offered to help, but I needed to do it myself first, or as close to myself as possible. Renee was there, which is what I needed, present and quiet, and ready to be useful without directing. We went through her bedroom first, the closet, the dresser, the nightstand. Her things were organized the way she organized everything, deliberately, with categories that made sense to her even when they did not immediately make sense to anyone else. Books by subject, clothes by season. In the nightstand drawer, alongside the expected things, I found a small, locked box. I did not have the key. I looked for it for 20 minutes and then called my Aunt Patricia, who told me there was a small brass key on my mother's keychain that I had not thought to look at carefully. I found the keychain in her purse by the front door. The key was there. The box contained a photograph, a hospital photograph, the kind they took in those days. A newborn in a striped hat, anonymous and new, the way all newborns look. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, a date, January 14th, 1980. Nothing else. That is the story I am keeping.